Before anything else, drop a like and make sure you're subscribed. It helps the video reach more Manchester City fans and makes sure you won't miss any updates when a real bombshell drops. And now come with me, because the latest movements behind the scenes show City aren't just thinking about the next match, they're sketching out the next chapter of the squad. There are days when the news doesn't arrive as an official announcement, but as a very clear signal that someone at the Etihad has pressed a button, and that kind of signal usually shows up in a specific way. A call here, a conversation there, people asking for technical details, trying to understand the landscape, trying to measure the yes and the no before taking the step that becomes a headline. That's exactly the atmosphere that forms when a big name appears for the January window, and City don't want to be the club that turns up late. The name of the moment is Antoine Semenyo, a wide forward for Bournemouth. And when a player like that enters City's radar, the question is never just, is he good? The real question is, does he solve a squad issue? Does he raise the level without breaking the logic of the group? Can he handle the kind of demands and tactical discipline this team requires? Because at City, raw talent isn't enough. If the guy doesn't fit the machine, he becomes an expensive part sitting still. What gives the story weight is the context. The January window always turns into a mini battlefield. Clubs desperate for a turnaround, others defending top spot, and a few trying to get ahead of the market before prices rise even more. And that's where Bournemouth come in, because they know exactly the value of the asset they're holding. When people talk about a release clause around $65 million, it isn't just a number to scare others off. It's a message. If you want him, pay and take him, but don't try to haggle. But there's no simple pay and take him when the subject involves several giants circling at the same time. Because the money, in many cases, is the start of the conversation, not the end. And that's exactly why this kind of movement turns into a race. United, Liverpool, and Tottenham are being mentioned as interested, and each one has its own narrative to convince the player. One offers immediate star status, another offers spotlight and tradition, another sells a project, a city, a manager, a promise of a leading role. And in the middle of all that, City arrive with their strongest argument when they're at their best. A system that creates chances, a winning structure, and a very clear path to develop. But here's a detail a lot of people forget. City don't sign players just to have one more. City sign to add depth without losing quality. And when we talk about depth, it's not empty talk. It's the kind of thing that decides a season. Because competitions pile up, intensity demands a price, and you don't win everything with 11 starters and hope. You win with a bench that comes on and keeps the standard, that changes games, that protects a result, that gives rest without reducing the threat. And why does Semenyo fit that logic? Because he offers a kind of aggression that can change the behavior of the attack in certain matches. He's direct, strong, attacks space, likes a duel, and isn't afraid to take people on. And for a team that, in many moments, faces low blocks and double marking, having someone with that breakthrough mode can be the difference between moving the ball around without hurting anyone and moving the ball until you finally open the wound. There's another layer to this discussion. The weight the team have placed on the shoulders of their center forward. When a side goes through spells where so much depends on Haaland sorting it out, you start to notice a silent risk. It's not that Haaland doesn't deliver, it's that the opponent starts building the entire plan to reduce his impact. And then City need more output from the flanks, more players taking responsibility for goals, more threat arriving in the box from different angles. Not to take shine away from the man who already decides matches, but to make sure the team doesn't become predictable. That's the point where the market stops being luxury and becomes security. Because if City want to push through January and February at their usual pace, any signing that adds energy, variety, and goals becomes something very serious. And from what's being said behind the scenes, there are important people pushing for the club to look closely at this type of player, someone who can step into big matches and tight matches without changing the team's identity. What's known is that there has been contact to understand the situation. And contact here doesn't mean an offer on the table in the most dramatic sense. It means that first move big clubs make when they don't want to be caught off guard. checking numbers, conditions, the clause, the current club's stance, and most importantly, what the player himself is thinking. Because there's no point discussing certain things if the player's decision is already leaning one way. And when the conversation becomes the player's decision, the game changes, because it isn't just a salary choice. It's a choice about role and story. There are players who'd rather go where they'll be undisputed, where they play 90 minutes every time, where they become an instant star. And there are players who'd rather go where they'll be tested, where they'll fight for space, but where the chance to win trophies, develop, and grow in level is real. And sometimes the choice is emotional too. City, family, lifestyle, work environment, relationship with the manager. In the end, it's a person deciding their own career. And for City, that part is crucial. Because the club can pay a release clause, but it can't buy the player's desire. If he looks at Manchester and sees an opportunity to become an important piece in a winning squad, great. If he looks and thinks he'll be stuck in rotation living off minutes, he might prefer another project. And that's exactly where City's approach tends to be smart. Not selling illusions, but selling a plan. A straight conversation about function, about how he'd be used, about how he can grow inside the system. The scenario gets even more competitive when other clubs try to use any sign of uncertainty as leverage. If there's noise about the manager's future, someone always shows up trying to push that as a weak point in negotiations. But that works more on supporters than on the inside. Inside, what matters is contract, structure, leadership, ambition, squad, and what the current manager is saying internally. If the manager is there, involved, demanding, planning, then the conversation is very different from a rumor flying around on social media. And the most important thing, City aren't a club that usually enter an auction on impulse. If they enter, it's because they've assessed it's worth it. And if they've assessed it's worth it, it's because they see real impact. So the question for supporters is simple and at the same time heavy. Would you accept seeing City trigger that clause and bring in a winger with this profile now? Because $65 million isn't spare change, and when that money goes out, it has to come back in performance, in goals, in matches unlocked, in solutions. What makes everything feel like the start of a saga is that there still isn't a definitive yes. There's interest, there are talks, there's an inquiry, there's the feeling that the next few weeks could speed everything up. And when a deal like this is at this stage, every detail becomes a trigger. An injury here, a slip up there, a rival moving forward, an agent signaling preference, and suddenly, we'll see, becomes, let's do it. And then, while a lot of people get stuck on just this one name, City also have another front that hits supporters right in the heart, keeping one of the most symbolic players of the recent era. Because a signing matters, but keeping a key piece is also a way of winning the market. And when it starts to circulate that the club are in talks to renew with a heavyweight in midfield, it changes the whole reading of what comes next. In this story, the backdrop is familiar. Everyone who follows City knows how the cycle of speculation works. You get close to a window, the headlines start, the "he could leave" begins, the European possibilities appear, talk of going back home starts, the new challenge conversation kicks off. And in many summers, the same script repeats with one specific name, Bernardo Silva. It feels like for years European football has looked at Bernardo as a player who would fit anywhere. And he would. He's intelligent, intense, versatile, competitive, and he has that rare mix of technique with discipline. He plays wide, plays inside, plays as a midfielder, plays as someone who presses and wins the ball, plays keeping possession under pressure. It's the kind of player managers love because he understands the game and doesn't need a manual to complete a mission. That's why the noise around him never really disappears. There's always a likely destination. There's always a club interested. There's always a narrative that now it happens. And as time passes, the conversation changes tone. It stops being just speculation and starts becoming a contractual concern. Because when a contract enters the zone where any uncertainty becomes a risk, the club have to decide whether to renew, sell, or accept the chance of losing him another way. What's changing now is the signal that there are active talks to extend the deal, And that, by itself, is a reality check for anyone treating his exit as inevitable, because active talks isn't the same as, "we'll see later." It's the club moving to solve it before it becomes a problem. It's the club trying to make sure a central player remains a pillar, including as a dressing room leader. And when you look at Bernardo's story at City, it makes sense the club would want that. He arrived, adapted, became a trusted piece, went through seasons with different roles, always delivering. He's the kind of player who represents a lot of what supporters have learned to recognize as the City way of playing. Intensity without the ball, intelligence with the ball, collective sacrifice, and a competitiveness that shows up precisely when the match gets difficult. At the same time, it's natural for the player to think. After so many years, it's normal for that private question to appear. Do I want to stay longer in the same place, or do I want another experience before my career moves into a different phase? And that decision isn't simple, because it involves more than football. It involves life. It involves family. It involves how you see yourself in 2 or 3 years. It also involves motivation. Some people feed off comfort and stability, and some people need change to feel alive. But stability at City isn't complacency. It's an environment where you know what you need to do to compete for everything. And for a player like Bernardo, who understands the value of a consistent project, that can be a huge argument. Because he knows where he is, he knows what day-to-day life is like, he knows what the manager expects, he knows the club don't sell empty promises. If a renewal comes with a clear plan and respect for his role in the squad, it's perfectly possible that weighs more than any outside temptation. And this is where supporters start holding their breath. Because if City managed to keep a name that big and still reinforce the attack with someone who can give depth and goals, the window takes on a different face. It's not just reacting to rumors. It's protecting the core and adjusting the edges. And that's what separates an organized club from one that's constantly putting out fires. But as much as supporters want quick answers, these talks are usually slow. They involve numbers, length, expectations, and above all, alignment about the future. And the future, at this moment, has a shadow that always appears when the subject is Manchester City, the manager's continuity. And that's exactly why, when the manager goes public to shut down the noise and reaffirm his commitment, it echoes through the entire squad, because players feel the environment. Players hear corridor talk. Players notice what changes when a cycle might be close to ending. And when the boss says, clearly, that he's fine, that he wants to stay, and that he isn't packing his bags, he isn't speaking only to the press. He's speaking to the group, the board, and the market. Before I go, hit like now, because it helps the video reach far more Manchester City supporters. And if you want to keep getting these updates first, with behind-the-scenes detail, context, and everything explained properly, check that you're subscribed and turn on notifications so you don't miss anything when a big story breaks for real. Drop a comment too. Would you trigger the clause for Semenyo, and would you renew Bernardo? I'll be reading the opinions. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.